Necessity being the mother of invention, while we're waiting, I thought, you know what? Why don't I start my part of the presentation? If everybody's okay with that, let's go. So, my part of the presentation, which clearly builds on what Mary is going to say, is around employment methods and why you need to know something a little bit about it. So, what we'll do is let's get going, and I'll say a little bit more. So, when you think about employment, and particularly the employment journey, often it's a bit like walking through a door blind. It's a bit like this curtain door here. You have lots of opportunities pointed at you from varieties of providers or different types of offerings, and it's a little bit daunting to potentially get your head around that and go, okay, which is the right one for me? And the simplest way to understand what is the right one is by having a little bit of education, because at the end of the day, education is the real key to choice and control. So let's have a look at some of the myths, dispel a few of the myths if I can over the next few minutes, and let's see where we end up. So, a little bit of history. For decades, of course, employment in Australia have been variations on the same thing. If you go back to the origins of sheltered workshops in the 40s, 50s and 60s, as they were then, and then in the 80s as they morphed into ADEs, they've largely been capture and keep organisations. And the reason I say that is that I've done a lot of work inside ADEs around Australia, and one of the questions I always ask is, how many people have transitioned from the ADE to open employment? And that's not to say that everybody has to, but in the context of their origins, that was what the mission was all about. And it's very rare that I find significant numbers of people that have transitioned from ADEs into open employment in the community. Now, is that necessarily a bad thing? On the surface, I would say yes. But remember, there are individuals that go into an ADE and that's where they want to stay. And that's great, because they build community networks and social networks, and that's fine. But as we move forward, there need to be more options. It shouldn't be you come through the door and that's where you end up. Now, in the last few years, what we've seen of ADEs, we've seen them morph into social enterprises. And social enterprises had their origins in Italy in the 80s, and they were set up as employment organisations for people with mental illness. And so then it's not a new concept, social enterprise. As a matter of fact, a friend of mine that I've known for decades owns one that most of you will have heard about, which is a global enterprise, and it's called Patagonia, the clothing and outdoor mob. And that started because Yvonne wanted to do something that had a purpose that would benefit society. So what we have to think about when we look at social enterprises today is that when we do the research, and we did some research a few years ago to define what a social enterprise is, and it needs to be a place that has a viable commercial business that pays award wages and employs the broader breadth of people in the community. In other words, if you have a disability, then you should be on the same wage as everybody else in the community that's doing that job. In terms of what happens in practice, there are variations on the theme over the decades where people have been placed and then trained, and then they should to train people first and then trained. Looks like Mary's joined the room, so Mary will get to be second cab off the rank because Mary, I've already started. And of course, in the 70s, some of you, if you're old enough, you might remember the work prep centres. Where there were a number of those around Australia that trialled in Sydney. There was one in Granville that Trevor Parmenter was involved in with Vivian Riches, and they were a variation on different ways of training people with work skills. So if you look at systems, and the system is the bigger picture stuff, if you look with the advent of the Disability Services Act in '86, we had DEN and we had CRS, which had been around since the Second World War, and the variations on mainstream services that still managed to collect participants with disabilities. And the beauty thing, of course, is that in '86 with the Disability Services Act, we got DES. Well, not initially, but eventually it morphed into Disability Employment Network, morphed into DES, which is the system we have today. But for me, the really great one, And I say that simply because I don't believe that the systems from 1986 onwards really lived up to their potential. But the Ndis Act in 2013 is the one that really gave us what I think is the third wave. And this is where participants and families really got to control what was going on. And this is where we're at now, where a lot of what we're doing, and today, is all about giving you a little bit more knowledge so that you can start to move closer and closer to really being in charge. Okay. It sounds like Mary might have a microphone turned on. So let's have a look at practice. So practice is interesting. Practice essentially falls into what I call 4 categories, which is individual, place, and support, which in a certain sense has been around for quite a few decades, as has customised employment. All of these methods have been around for decades, but IPS today is largely used for clients that have mental illness. If we look at practice globally, we tend to see a mixture of variations on customised employment and IPS. And if you look at customised employment, which has its origins in individual education plans in the 80s in the USA, both of these methodologies are very similar, and they have characteristics of the same and some variations. And that variation is simply caused by IPS heading in the direction of primarily supporting people with mental illness, and customised employment had its focus on people with intellectual and developmental disability. The other methodology you'll see, which is common in the DES system, of course, is compliance-based practices, because the DES system is very much a compliance-based system. It has prescribed goalposts, in other words, quick to start, 13, 26, 50, 52 weeks. And then, of course, the other particular methodology, which is fairly common, is a thing called anecdote. And that's commonly described as, well, we've always done it that way, and that's why we do it, but no one knows where it came from. Is that necessarily a good thing? Not really, but at the same time, if you're living in a small community, the likelihood is that anecdotal practice is probably being derived from what the community wants and what the community does and works in that community. Would it be something you'd want to see all the time? Not really. It's what we really need to see is evidence-based practices. Okay, so does any of this really matter? Well, yeah, it does, particularly if you're a client of the NDIS, because the NDIS is predicated on delivering individualised services that deliver a service that's unique to you and your needs. I'm trying not to look too much at the camera, but you can see it turns my lenses white. So the NDIS is an early intervention system designed to support an individual to develop the capacity to live a life of opportunity based on their unique and burgeoning talents and capabilities. Now, that's my description, not their description, but if you think about it, when you pull the act apart, really that's kind of the intent. In practice, it means starting as early as possible. It means addressing the whole person. And importantly, it means engaging, educating, and supporting the family on the journey. Because clients don't exist in isolation. Clients, the people that are in the system, that are participants of the NDIS, have families by and large. And those families have been part of the journey long before any of us came onto the scene to provide supports to the client. So it's really key that you work and support the family. It is one of the things that we periodically see with the clients we work with, is the families say they're so overwhelmed by what's going on and finally getting some supports that are working for their child that they sort of, well, it overwhelms them. They need support as well around their anxieties. They take a deep breath and go, finally, something's moving forward. And that needs to be recognised and supported as well. So there's some of the key things there. Now, go to my next slide. I'm conscious of everybody else waiting for me. You need to use the whole toolkit. When we talk about customised employment, for instance, we're talking about more than that. For most people, customised employment is the discovery process, and discovery is mentioned within the NDIS funding regime. But you need to look at other tools depending on where the individual is in their journey. If you look at someone who's towards the end of their school and post-school, you use things like the self-determined career design model, which is about looking at what the career looks like. And what we find with some of these tools, particularly this SD-CDM, self-determined career design model, and the SD-LMI, which is the self-determined learning model of instruction, these are really good adjuncts to discovery, because what they do is they enhance the outcome that we can get from discovery. Now, all of these are brilliant tools. And when we look at the thing, it isn't about saying you only need this and you only do that. The whole point of having a unique program is that you can use a variety of tools depending on where the individual is in their journey. For instance, we're working with some young kids who are 13 and 14, and as part of that process, we use the first parts of the discovery tool to understand them and their family and their extended family and their community. But we also use the SDLMI as part of the process of developing their capacity to be a better self-advocate, because from our perspective, and this is me talking, what we try to achieve when we work with individuals, and I think this is really key, is that for people to have control, to exercise real choice and control, they need to be stronger self-advocates. So from our perspective, we believe that an outcome of any employment intervention should be either a vocational pathway, a career pathway, and importantly, the client with a greater capacity to self-determine and self-advocate. Now, again, one of the interesting things is that's come into the funding with the NDIS's workplace counselling. That is really key, because we know that often when people do find employment, what tends to be the thing that tips them out is they don't understand the culture. They're not aware of the things. Oh, yeah, Mary, you finally made it. I've jumped in, I'm doing my bit first, and we'll get back to you. So one of the key exercises from our point of view is that workplace counselling can be used around helping an individual around their anxieties and what are appropriate behaviours in the workplace. So that's a really key thing. So for me, hey Mary, can you turn your camera off? Then I can continue reading. Just at the top of the screen. Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Mary. One of the things that I think everyone should end up with is a unique, highly individualised program of supports designed to enhance their learning, their understanding, and their career pathway. And one of the things I don't want to see, that I really don't want to see in people's toolkits, is assessments that try to predict someone's future. Where are you going to go? And put you in a pigeonhole. Because I don't know about you. Think about that. I'm in my 60s, but I reckon I did 35 years of work experience to work out where I had to go. So pigeonholing people for me, no. Otherwise, if I was pigeonholed, I would have been pigeonholed into that role that my high school career counsellor said I was going to be, which is a ranger in New Zealand. So I'd be probably someone's, I don't know, I'd probably been eaten by a wild animal by now. So who knew? So what am I saying? What I'm saying is that the NDIS gives you an opportunity to use the supports to have an intervention, a program that's 100% unique to you. And you shouldn't settle for anything less than 100% unique to you employment intervention. So on that slide, I'm going to hand back to John, and I'm going to drop out, and John will go all the way to the start where Mary's slides are, and John will introduce Mary, and we'll start again. So the running order is a little bit out of whack. So I'm out of here, John. I'll be back later.
Hello, everyone, and sorry for the technical challenges that we've had this afternoon, but great that we've got Mary here with us. And so Peter might have mentioned we're going to be running this session in 4 parts, a little bit out of order at the moment. So I'm just bringing back the slides back to the beginning. And so at the end after Mary's presentation, then I will be presenting around the practice area, and then we'll have a Q&A. So thank you for those that have popped their questions in there. Thank you, Alison. And for other members who are here today, please pop your questions in and we'll have a Q&A session at the end. Almost back at the start. And so Mary, you might want to pop your camera on and make sure that's all ready to go.
It looks
So thank you for joining us today, Mary. And Mary is the Director of Strategic Initiatives for Employment Outcomes branch of the NDIA. And we're grateful to have Mary here today to talk about employment supports under the NDIS and that individual approach that the NDIS provides for funding the employment journey. So thank you for joining us. Please pop your questions and I'll ask the questions at the end. So thank you. Thank you, Mary.
Great. Thanks. I hope it's okay.
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Great. Thank you. So, and apologies it took so long. This is the first time we've used this particular program. So, look, as Peter's already said, it's very much an individualised approach. We're just going to quickly run through the slides and I'm just going to emphasise a few things on the way. So we'll move straight down to slide 4, which it talks about the employment strategy for the agency as a whole. And you can see there that by 2023, we are intending having 30% of working age participants actually in paid employment. So we've got a way to go. We measure around 23 or 24% right now. However, a lot of those people are working in Australian disability enterprises, and one of our intentions is to assist people to move through the disability enterprises and into open employment where that is possible. So we've got a few focus areas. We're having a look at those at the moment, so we won't go through those to any great extent, but we are particularly concerned that our participants do have employment goals and the right supports in their plans. And whilst we are concentrating or focusing on our school leavers for this year at the moment, in the future we will be working with schools and with parents and with other service providers to help build young people's aspirations towards work. And then, of course, we've got to work closely with our service providers to make sure that they are able to deliver in the model that we consider to be appropriate for individual participants. So, moving on.
Slide 6.
Yep. And so that, look, there's lots of options, and a participant can ask through their planning meeting to obtain the necessary support for whatever pathway they choose. And you can see up there on that slide, it could be an apprenticeship or a traineeship. They might want to work that independently with perhaps just the support of their family, starting with some volunteering, looking at school leaver employment supports, which basically from the NDIS perspective is purely building a budget for a person to then go and individually design with a provider or several providers the type of supports that they will need to actually build skills to get into employment. We do have other employment related supports as well, such as assessment and counselling, and then ongoing assistance to find and keep a job. Or it could be to actually look to and be supported whilst working with a disability employment service provider, or perhaps learning about work and gaining work skills by working in an Australian disability enterprise, or eventually maybe even trying self-employment. So and I think Peter's really touched on this, what do we expect the funding to be used for? Firstly, it is to get that right preparation for work, so to establish all the necessary foundation skills and to develop an identity as a future worker. And then through work experience, the customising or the modification of work routines and work requirements, and on-the-job support once a person is in employment. And then also perhaps some capacity building, which might be about communication or relationships, or learning to actually listen more attentively and then be able to carry out instructions. And then progressing through work. So looking at further skills development beyond what an employer is obliged to provide, looking at career planning, and most importantly, like all of us, as Peter said, how many jobs have we all had in our lives? Learning how to exit and get a new job, or get a new job and then exit your old job is the preferred model in my view. So the next slide will then just show, and that's number 9, just shows the type of those, the different types of employment supports. The supports in employment, just so you all know, is ongoing support that a person may need when they're actually in a job. Now, this is brand new. We haven't had this until just this year, but that is something that we will be able to fund into the future. So, but first of all, we've got to get a person into a job. So the next few slides show the employment-related assessment and counselling, and that is vocational and functional assessments that actually will help a person determine what is their employment potential and what is the best pathway to follow to actually get into the job of choice. And then often people need some, and we use the term counselling, but it's about supporting someone to actually, having chosen a pathway, then to support them through that. We do know that not all pathways are smooth, so helping to actually pave the way to make that journey to work as simple and as trouble-free as possible. And it also can include the information to the employer about what the particular needs of their potential future employee are, and career counselling as time goes on. Supports in employment, I have mentioned that, but that is the new type of support that we can make available, which will actually support a person in their job in an ongoing way, and that can be through, continued funding in subsequent plans. But we need to make sure the person has the right job to be supported in. So then moving on to the next slide, that just provides a little bit more information on the supports in employment, and it can be a combination of a variety of activities, but it's on the job in the workplace. And then we'll move on to actually school leaver employment supports, because I know that's a particular focus today. So what are they? So they are about helping young people transition from school into employment. However, we do know that some young people have missed that opportunity. They didn't discuss it at a previous planning meeting, so they may be in their early 20s and they're still wanting to consider this similar type of support. That's perfectly fine. It's about helping the young person to explore their work potential and then building their skills, working out what skills they actually need to develop to become more independent. That might be in things like money handling, being able to use public transport, being able to approach an employer independently and ask about what job opportunities they have. And then we do the practical on-the-job experience, or trying and testing, is very important for people to actually develop an understanding of what the demands of work are and also what actually suits them, what is the best job match for them. We generally are funding this type of support for 2 years, but it's not impossible to have additional funding, but what we need for that is to know exactly what the goals are, whether they remain the same, and where the person has progressed to in order to build their next plan appropriately. The most important comment on that particular slide is that it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's very much about an individualised approach that actually is meant or is intended to meet the needs of each individual participant. So I've already said that usually final year of school, some of you might be in year 11 now or have a young person who's in year 11, they could start to consider what they're going to do throughout their final year of school and whether they may need some support for on-the-job work experience, which would be in addition to what the departments of education can offer, or it could be that they want to try part-time work like a lot of their peers. And then once the person is finishing school, we definitely want to have information that will enable us to build plans that will help the young person to actually develop the skills in the years following their leaving school. it's very much an individual decision. Like we are not dictating when such funding should go in plans, but we do, more than encourage, we request that our planners and local area coordinators absolutely have a conversation about what is life after school going to look like when a young person's coming up to the 17th or 18th birthday. We prefer it to happen whilst they're still at school because we don't want to have a gap. We don't want to lose young people into continued unemployment because they haven't been able to get the right support to make the transition from school life, which is a very, very, very organised arrangement. And all of a sudden, that a young person at age 18 is expected to be making decisions about just what they do on a daily basis. So helping to actually set all that in place is really important. So the next slide will just show you a picture of some of the things that should be happening. I heard Peter already mention about discovery. That is really important. So that's where you go out, and that's where relationships between a provider and local employers is really useful because it can provide those opportunities to actually try out what the person might like to do and to actually see how workplaces operate, which may be something that is foreign to them. Looking at the work experience in a range of settings, really learning how to be a good employee, to take instructions. I'm still learning that part. And then travel training. So actually learning to, use public transport. You don't want mum or dad you don't want a young person relying on mum or dad to actually get them to work. It's not the usual practice. Okay, so when a person is looking at their planning meeting, I hope you all know about the booklet called Let's Talk About Work.
We're just on slide 19, John.
Sorry, I moved on. Yeah, we'll need to keep going a little bit. Yeah, next one. Okay, so preparing planning meetings booklet, and that young people are being assisted by current providers, by their teachers, by school counsellors and by parents to actually look at what they're going to talk about in their planning meeting. I have been at sessions with young people, their parents and school teachers, and they have reported that working their way through this booklet is really helpful to helping to shape their own thinking about what are possibilities into the future. So moving on to 20. And then also, what do you need for your planning meeting, apart from working your way through that workbook? Also, what school reports do you have? Do you have any career transition plans? Are there functional assessments that you may have had completed by health professionals who've been working with a young person, including things like a vocational profile? If someone's been involved in work experience, having some reports from that, they're from those employers, any references that they actually have, and that might be from their part-time work. It could be from, say, a sports coach, and then making sure that the person is able to bring all of that together and along with their workbook to actually have an informed planning conversation when it comes that time to complete their plan. The next thing is about then getting the right provider. So we are really encouraging people to exercise their choice. This is what NDIS is about. It's providing that opportunity for every participant, but in particular young people, to start thinking of themselves as a young adult and to start thinking about, who do I want to work with? Because they don't have to go to, as they did under a lot of the old block funded arrangements, they had to go to a particular provider. That is no longer the case. The choice is the person's and their parents. So how do you find out who's a good provider? So talking to local area coordinators, they know a lot about what's going on in the local community. Or if the young person has their own support coordinator, getting them to help in the selection of a provider, going online, seeing what employment service providers are saying about what they have to offer. In usual times, we would have been all out speaking at expos. We've done a few virtual ones, a bit like this today, during the year. And so hopefully people have had an opportunity to actually attend one or other of those. And then going and actually speaking to participants who may have been a year or 2 years ahead at school and finding out what their experience has been, who are the ones that they found to be good and those that they would prefer they'd never actually met. And then what we've done is, and it's published on our website now, we have what we're calling a comparison worksheet, and that enables a young person and their parents to go and ask particular questions of providers and then to compare what kind of responses they got. So the questions, and they're not, they're not something highly unusual, but we just have we put them together so that they're there in an accessible place for people, and then pull out the questions that you particularly want to ask. You don't have to ask them all, but you can actually find out from each provider what they have to offer you in your particular circumstances. And that is another opportunity to say, well, can I come for just a tester? Can I come and see how you run a group? Can I see what you're doing in relation to a particular living skills activity prior to actually committing and developing a service agreement with any individual provider? So on our website now, there's lots of resources. So feel free to go and browse and then look through things. If you've got any questions, you can always send them through to our inquiries inbox, and that will come into someone in the actual employment team. So there on the final slide in the set is actually the contact details, or the 1800 number, where you can actually give people a call, and then they can actually pass that query through to an appropriate person who can get back to you. So that's the summary, and very much just as I close, I'll just simply say, remember, individualise what suits you and your choice of what type of work you want to do. Happy to leave it there. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Mary. That was definitely worth the wait. So thank you very much for that presentation. We've got some good questions coming through. So thank you, Michael and Alison and Sharon, for popping some questions in. But I encourage you all to jump in and ask some questions, and Mary and Peter will pop up after my presentation, and we'll go through those questions and try to answer them for you. But I think you agree that it was fantastic to hear from Mary today, and employment supports. Now I'm just moving through Peter's presentation to mine, so I'm going to focus on how it looks in practice. So how can we customise these methods that Peter talked about in his presentation, as well as the supports that Mary's talked about in her presentation, and how we see it happening on the ground with individuals that we're working with and with organisations that we're working with. So I'm just going to go through our focus around evidence-based employment, aligning practice with the funding supports, some case examples for you, some employment supports, some other employment supports, and how we're reporting and demonstrating progress for the NDIS and for the families, of course. So at CEDA, we're very passionate about evidence-based employment because we really want to see meaningful paid employment for individuals with disabilities, and paid employment within jobs that match the individual's strengths, interests, within community-based positions and award-wage positions. So we are also passionate about the evidence around discovery, which Mary touched on, and customised employment, and we want to see that discovery is delivered with fidelity. So if providers are out there offering discovery and customised employment, we want to support them to ensure that they're delivering it to the best in evidence-based practice. And through our CDOT College, we've been working closely to build the skills of professionals in the industry so we can have as many people working in this area as possible, and therefore as many people as possible benefiting from this type of support. Now in this slide, I've just broken down the school leaver employment supports, and this is down the left-hand side. It's taking the information from the NDIS and from the price guide, and just talking about how we see it kind of happening in line with the practice that we're working in and the evidence that we're working in. So Mary touched on, the transition from school to employment, and we know from the evidence that starting early and supporting key transitions for individuals with disabilities is key. We're starting to work with individuals as young as 13 and starting to, not under the school leavers employment supports, but under other areas of their supports, to support them to start thinking about employment and to have a vision around their employment going forward. We're also looking, if you look at the plan and implement a pathway to inclusive employment, and discovery is the tool that really guides this process to open employment. So the discovery process, where we invest time to ensure that we get to know the individual, the family, the people around them, and really discover those skills and interests within the community, within workplaces, as well as community-based activities. Then we look at focusing on capacity building for goal achievement, and we've been bringing into our practice and working with other organisations around the self-determination tool set, and Peter touched on that as part of the toolkit. But we see the work around working with individuals to self-determine their direction is a great way to build their capacity around the direction for their career, as well as the discovery visits, exploration that we do within the community to also build on those, build on their capacity. When we look at an individual approach, well, customizing it to the individual is key. So true person-centered practices in terms of the customized employment approach. So no group-based program with the individual, within community, within settings where people with similar skills, similar interests spend their time. Mary touched on a strong emphasis on try and test and work experience, and there's such strong evidence in this space, and work experience is a key component of the processes that we work with, and also work with other organisations to deliver. So that work experience can come as simple as testing an interest or testing a skill. So if there's an interest in computers, for example, or an interest in animals, how do we explore those interests within a workplace environment, within a community-based environment? And so those work experiences can be quite informal to start with, to explore, is this an interest, is this a strength, is this a potential vocational theme coming through for the individual? And then as we move and get to know the individual better, and we have a greater understanding of those vocational themes, and have built the relationships with the family and the people that know the person well, we start to explore work experience more formally. So where do people with similar vocational themes work? And let's go in and get to know those businesses, talking to those businesses, and learning about how their business works, what opportunities there might be, what barriers they might have, what areas might we be able to support that business going forward, and then introducing the job seeker within these businesses and having work tasters, having the job seeker engage and build rapport with the particular business owner. We know that the relationship that's built with an employer and the individual is what really leads to that sustainable employment outcomes for that job seeker. SLES refers to School Leavers Employment Supports, refers to workplaces that pay award wages, and the evidence and the focus around our work is always around award wages, mainstream businesses that align with those vocational themes that are developed over time. Soft skill development is where we start to, through the customised employment approach, we start to, I'll just move myself up there so I can, so you can see the text. But we start to explore those skills and emerging skills. Sorry, I jumped ahead. That's a community-based incidental learning where we're working, getting to know the individual in different environments, exploring those skills. So it's not about perhaps going to a classroom to learn particular skills, but to be out there in community and to explore those skills. So if it's around getting to work, for example, as we're working with the job seeker around supporting them through work experience, we're exploring those skills and supporting those skills, but actively supporting those skills so we can ensure the individual builds their independence and their skills going forward. So as much as possible, we're looking to fade our supports or redirect our supports as the individual starts to work towards employment in the community. Develop an understanding of work capability and confidence. So the discovery process really leads us to exploring those skills or emerging skills that we can then explore with informed future supports. So as we move through these processes of getting to know the individual and working through the discovery phases into job development, we look at building things such as the natural supports that occur in the workplace, exploring what workplace accommodations, what learning techniques suit the job seeker best. And we then sort of work towards how we redirect our supports around career planning and career progression after that. So it's not just about any job, but it's about the right job and the right career. So we, as Peter and Mary both touched on, we don't often stay in a job long term. It's about how we then redirect our support so we ensure that progression is occurring within that workplace. How does the person take the next step in their career? How do they build the skills to further progress, whether that's within that particular workplace or whether it moves into other workplaces after that? So I just thought I'd give you an example. I was fortunate enough to meet with a young job seeker last week, and Kian and his mother were very happy for us to share a little bit about his story, to give you a sort of a practical example about how we're seeing SLES, how we're seeing School Leavers Employment Supports delivered in practice. So we've just started our weekly meetings with Kian. So we first met within the family home and getting to know Kian within his home environment, getting to know his mum and getting to know some of his skills in that face-to-face approach. So while we were there, Kian was very happy to show us some of his drawings that he's worked on, really showing some skills and some real strong interests around illustration, and particularly when it was drawing animals, was a strong theme, and it also led into a strong interest around books that were also along the same theme, as well as movies and other interests like that. So Kian had some fantastic skills with drawing, and even his mother shared an example where she asked him to draw an image of a horse, and within 10 minutes, Kian had produced that picture, and it was excellent work. He also has an interest in photography, so there's another photo that his mum has shared with us that he took, I believe, last week when visiting a local beach. So some of those skills around a bit of an eye for detail coming through for Kian. Kian also, the animal, has done a little bit of volunteering while he was at school. He's now post-school, and did some volunteering at a local vet where he did a lot of the cleaning up within the vet clinic. He also observed operations taking place. So not only was there a keen interest in animals, but there was a real openness to try new things, and wasn't squirmish about any of these things that may often be squirmish for some of us. The animal interests also around the animals he had in the home. So he had 2 dogs in the home, and they were happy to share with us the different personalities of the animals in the house, and how Kian supported them with their calmed their dogs. They're very calm in nature with the animals. So just from this home visit, we were able to explore so many strong interests coming through. There was an interest around community support work, particularly around aged care, and previous role in supporting his grandparent when he was unwell. So Kian had an interest in potentially doing some work with an aged care facility as well. Just within a couple of hours within the home, there was some strong interest coming through, and some obvious skills with his drawings, and also his work with animals. So as we continue to work with Kian, we'll have weekly visits. We'll also do behind the scenes work where we talk to other people that know him well. So that might be another family member, it might be a close friend that he still has from school. There might be a neighbour who might be worth talking to. There may be someone, other people's of interest that we'll get to know Kian through getting to know them as well, but also to explore what are Kian's networks and friends do for a living well. So, we know the impact of social capital is so important in terms of how we get a job, and often we all get jobs through people we know. So exploring those social networks. Other things that occur behind the scenes is starting to engage with businesses who align with these vocational themes as they start to emerge. So these themes that are starting to come out in the initial visits will be explored within the community and through engaging with businesses that people themes are participating in. Then we look at fortnightly employment counselling as well, and working with Kian around his self-determination and decision-making, and really directing his career going forward. And also any fears or concerns, any workplace skills or capacity that we will work with. Covered off on the employment supports really thoroughly. There's employment supports around this work that sits within core funding under assistance with social, economic and community participations. And there's also funding that sits within capacity building around finding and keeping a job, such as finding and keeping a job, school leaders, employment supports. Some individuals we're working with have used improved and their participation in community going forward. If you're a family member or a organisation, and you want some, happy to chat with you if you want some conversations around how the different supports under the NDIS. Now, Mary touched on when you're coming back to meet with the NDIS, the NDIS is really keen to see the progress that occurs. And this is a new document we've developed. This is part of a much larger report that we're providing to the individuals, demonstrating how a one-pager to show how they're progressing through the different stages towards having a job, having a great job, the right fit for them, and those employment supports and that career development going forward. So under each area, then within the report, we'll break it down to show what's occurred, what are the key things that have occurred through each stages, so we can see how the job seeker is progressing towards that goal of employment. And just down so there's the, in terms of the customised employment approach, there's the 4 different stages that moves through discovery stage 1, which 3 of the areas, and this is at all the areas, but that includes the home visits, the neighbourhood visits, the interviews with others. Discovery stage 2 is when we move into the discovery visits, where we're out there in the community and we're exploring those skills within community-based settings. Informational interviews, which happens at multiple stages. So we do informational interviews to explore interest and explore skills, to see if these are themes that are emerging for the job seeker, and then we use informational interviews to really get to know the business as well before we start negotiating employment outcomes, work experience outcomes. Work experience there, then we move into the job development stage, and a couple of things there is when we have those emerging themes become those more set vocational themes, which can obviously change, particularly when we're working with a young job seeker. I hope my reception's working okay. I see it's jumping around a little bit, so my apologies about that. Then within the job development, we develop a list of 20. So once we have the vocational themes, we develop a list of 20 employers. This leads to more of the informational interviews, work experience, job negotiation, and exploring that as we go into that finding a job, and then that post-employment supports, ensuring mutuality, the right fit for the employer and the right fit for the job seeker. Post-employment supports, natural supports occurring in the workplace, how we can reduce our supports over time and encourage the natural supports and the self-determination of the job seeker. And then that career planning and that self-determination, which goes through the whole process. So this is a snapshot which then forms part of a larger report, so that then when the family want to explore what's been happening with their young person, they can see some of the key progression. Also, if they would like to then share this report with a LAC or an NDIS or local area coordinator or an NDIS planner, they can provide them with this one-page snapshot, as well as a more detailed progression of some of the key achievements and some of the key things that have occurred for that particular job seeker. Now, we're just about to start the Q&A section, so please continue to pop your questions on there. And I asked Peter and Mary to come back and join us. I've popped our contact details. Peter and I are always open to having a chat. So there's my phone number and Peter's phone number if you'd like to give us a call as well. And so we'll move on to the Q&A. Hopefully my reception's coming through okay, Peter. Okay.
Your reception is like looking at fog. You clearly live in a great black spot in.
Okay, well, I apologise for that. So we've had some good questions coming through. Now, Alison had a question for Mary. Let me just bring that up. So Alison was asking Mary, I'm trying to know what is the best way forward for my son who has 2 more years at school before he's finished. He has pretty complex disability, but I'm confident he can get some employment. How do you get the school to be more supportive of what you want for your child? And can they still be at school but start using their NDIS to look for employment options? Pass to you, Mary. I think Mary might have frozen. Peter, do you want to jump in? Are you with us, Mary? I think you're with us now.
Yes. Yeah. Can you?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Can you hear us? Okay. Okay. Yes. Well, look, the school, I would approach your, transition teacher. I'm not quite sure what they're called in Victoria. In New South Wales, they're transition teachers. If that doesn't work very well, I'd be talking to the principal about what support is available to young people prior to and during that transition time from school. Certainly, we would encourage that exploration whilst the young person's at school. It might be that you need to use some of their capacity building funding to have the appropriate assessments undertaken as to what their strengths are and what areas they will need to have additional support and training in order to actually start to seriously consider about what job will suit them best. But you could start that kind of preparation. You could also have support providers actually start to explore with them what things they're interested in, and perhaps to look at some either volunteering or work experience in those last couple of years at school, so they can go and try out a few of their own ideas in a real workplace. So yes, right. And you can use funding to support that.
Thank you, Mary. Peter, did you want to add anything to that, or happy to go to the next question? Yep.
No.
Okay, so Michael has asked, how would an open employment enterprise know about the supports in employment? Will there be marketing campaign around these supports? And Michael's also asked, why is School Leavers Employment supported and promoted over accredited training? Mary, do you want to have a go answering this one first? I think Mary's frozen on us. Sorry about the quality of our internet at the moment, everybody. Peter, do you want to jump in and how open employment enterprises know about the supports in employment?
Well, I mean, if Mike, if you're referring to when you say open employment enterprises, are you referring to employers? Or are you referring to providers? I guess from a provider perspective, what I would say is that I'm not familiar with anything within the NDIS funding regime that prioritises one thing over another. I mean, capacity building. Mary's come back in. So, when you look at it, at the end of the day, the supports for the individual and how you use them is unique to the individual. So I've not come across anything that prioritises one thing over another for an individual. Mary,
yep.
Are you there? Yep. Michael's question related to I can find it. Yeah, Mike talked about
whether there be a marketing campaign to let open employment enterprise know about these type of supports within employment.
He also wanted to know why the school leaver employment support supported, why is SLES supported and promoted over accredited training, but I'm not aware of anything like that, so
No.
probably talk to it more.
No, so I started to answer that when I got disconnected. So first of all, it's not promoted over and above accredited training. It is whatever the individual is actually best suited to utilise in order to make to allow them to gain employable skills. So we would be promoting whatever is best suited to the. We won't have an open marketing campaign. There will be information campaigns run by the Department of Social Services, and we will be part of that. There's also very likely to be another one conducted with other agencies, including some of the insurers, which is about helping employers to understand how they can best help people with a health condition or a disability to either get back into the workforce or to enter the workforce for the first time. So there will be some of those publicly available information campaigns, but most importantly for an NDIS participant, it is about an individualised job matching, and we rely on our NDIS providers to undertake that, to make the connection with potential employers, and then to set up the necessary supports for both the employer and the NDIS participant to make that a successful entry into work. So certainly we rely on the providers for that. We will be working very closely with them over the next little while and in the future to make sure they understand their obligations and also how to make best use of the resources and the funding that we can make available to participants.
Thanks, Mary. We had a question as well from Sharon, and I know Sharon's doing a little bit of work with a young university student who had a goal around employment and was looking for some funding around his employment goals. And Sharon's asking if this type of funding, school leavers employment supports or other employment funding, is available to university students.
Yeah, either that or it could start with something like employment-related assessment and counselling, so that he gets the right information and assistance to point him in the right direction about the types of work that will best suit him. And then it can be the what's called at the moment workplace assistance, or it can be the school leaver employment. It doesn't really matter. They are interchangeable. But just knowing what he wants to do and how best we can assist at the planning meeting is the way to get the right funding in his plan, and then picking the right service providers to assist is the next.
Great. And this follows on from that question. Kristen's asked, what supports are available to older participants for the NDIS, of the NDIS?
Yes, so it's definitely under the finding and keeping a job category. And as I said, at this stage, it's called assistance to the main education and higher further education employment. So that's the support category for older participants.
This follows on from that question, and it's around an older people who may be without a job or in disrupted employment for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, so similar. I mean, they will probably need assistance to understand the best direction to take, and also what resources are available for them to utilise, and that can be with NDIS providers. We also would look to NDIS providers to see whether there are resources available in the mainstream employment services that can be made use of, such as disability employment service providers, and the things that they can help their clients with, or it could be under the Job Active. So, having an NDIS provider who can actually help identify and connect the participant with the right resources is also important.
Great. And Nikki's asked, sorry, Mary, continue.
We don't have everything on our own. We should be making use of whatever is available to the general community as well.
Yeah, and Nikki's asked about a funding. It seems to be comparing core and capacity building. So she talks about that individuals can use their social and community participation budget for exploring employment. But Nikki felt that this was for use within an ADE type environment, and thought finding a keep your job in capacity building was the funding available for employment exploration.
Yes, so it's certainly the job is definitely available for that exploration and the job matching processes. However, we do know that a number of our providers who were not ADEs have actually started helping people, helping their clients to actually identify work opportunities. And so there are a number of providers who are utilising the social and community participation budgets to assist participants to start to gain work skills. So they may not have had the finding and keeping a job budget, but they've managed to utilise the others. As time goes on, we will look the actual supports for a person in an ADE and also in any other type of work with ongoing support will be in the core budget under what will then be called economic and community participation. So that's where that funding is actually going. So, but look, to be honest, it doesn't really matter. If there's money there and they've got the right provider, let's make use of it. The only restriction there is that a provider needs to be registered in the correct category to be able to claim against particular support items, which is why we had community participation providers who were not ADEs utilising community participation funding to help people gain work skills.
Great. And that projection of how things are shifting in terms of that core funding, is that happening in the short term, Mary, or do you have a time frame around that shift?
Yeah, so it's happening right now. Since the 1st of July this year, that funding has been available. It's being used by employees in ADEs at the moment. So as their plans are coming up for review, we're switching the funding over. But it will ultimately, and if someone were to approach us who was having a planning meeting tomorrow, who was actually needing assistance on the job, we would be able to put that funding in their plan. But we haven't really had a call on that yet.
Okay, great. Beth has asked, I found planners are reluctant to put in employment supports for students still at school. How can providers assist in getting this support put into students' plans?
By having a nice, clear plan developed with the participant that they take to their planning meeting. A compelling argument. We will be working more with our staff and with local area coordinators to, get the message. It already is it's one of their performance indicators to actually to consider work as a goal for participants in the working age group. So that's already really, that's there. It's a matter of actually getting it well understood and instilling confidence in our planners and local area coordinators that they should be including it in the funding in a plan. Going to the Let's Talk About Work booklet and utilising that. I think waving that in front of a planner is a really good option because they will recognise.
You probably covered this, so just make sure. So Kristen's asked, how are we breaking down the barriers for LACs and planners so people are in tune with the economic participation being an expectation and an outcome of individuals' NDIS?
Yeah, it's like everything we do. And I don't know whether many of you have seen the announcement from the agency today, but it basically talks about 4 discussion papers that we're putting out, and but the prelude to it is that we've spent a lot of time over the last 7 years bringing in 400,000 people into the scheme. Now it's time to improve the scheme much more participant, make it a favourable experience for participants. Reading those will give you a bit of
Just breaking up a little bit there, I think, Mary.
Yeah, I got to say, I was in the middle of one of the motorways or the or a runway at the airport.
Might be the mice again.
So what I was saying was that if you have a look at the announcements from the agency today and the discussion pages that have been put out for consultation, you'll get an idea of the complexity and the breadth of the topics that our planners and local area coordinators have to be across, and the change that happens all the time, and they have to keep up with it. So the participant focus in terms of employment outcomes is now set and will remain. So it's now a matter of actually putting in place and getting everyone who works on plans to understand how they best can help a participant to achieve an employment outcome. So it's a matter of energy, time, and getting the right messages at the right time.
Fantastic. Now, I think we've covered every question from the group, and I think we've gone half an hour over time, but we did start a fair bit late. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Mary. Your input today has been brilliant. Is there anything you want to leave the group with before you get back to your busy workday?
No. Thanks. I wish it had been a smoother entry.
Us too.
As a rehabilitation counsellor, I certainly would want a smoother entry into employment for my colleagues. So apologies for that, but I'm sure there'll be other opportunities, and we will certainly be doing our best to get out and about and to get the right messages out. We are working with our community engagement people and with all the state education and Catholic and independent schools to make sure that they all understand as well the opportunities available through NDIS for their students. So thank you all.
Fantastic. Maybe we'll have to get you back, Mary, when we sort out all the gremlins and make sure everything's working.
Give me ordinary hall and a microphone any day.
Yes, face to face. Peter, did you have any comments before we finish up?
I think that's good. Apart from the mice at the NBN running out of steam, it's been a reasonably interesting presentation given the logistical issues we had. But that aside, there's some really good information in there, and as I said in my presentation, it's all about education and information, and that's what will make things go forward: education and information.
Yeah.
Great, and we have another free webinar coming up next week, focused around social capital and the importance of social capital for an individual with a disability in finding open employment outcomes. So you're welcome to all join us, and yeah.
And it has better NBN from where that's coming from.
Lauren will be presenting next week, so I'm out. Thank you all. Thank you, Mary. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, everyone, for coming.
No problem. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.